Thank you for joining us. Today's story tour is Preaching and Teaching, Legacies in Church and Education. My name is Wendy and I will be your moderator. Today's story tour is Preaching and Teaching, Legacies in Church and Education. Our hosts are Toby Word, Sales Manager for Chesapeake Convention and Visitors Bureau, and Jessica Cosmas, Historical Services Manager for Chesapeake Parks, Recreation, and Tourism. Today's presentation and question and answer are being recorded. If you have questions or comments you would like shared, please use the chat feature. All questions and comments will be addressed at the end of the program. For the best presentation experience, we have muted the microphone and turned off video for all users. Be sure to select speaker view on the top right corner of your screen, not gallery. We are proud of the historical treasures we have here and excited to present a few in this format.
Thank you for joining us. We are happy to present this historical programming. Our hope is that the stories shared will help you experience another side of Chesapeake. Most of what will be shared during the series is from early America, the beginning of our country's history. We will be quoting historic documents predominantly from the 18th and 19th centuries. Some of the words used are reflective of the time when they were written. These words are not commonly used in the 21st century. Now, Jessica will lead us in our conversation about the historic African American churches in Chesapeake.
There are many historic African American churches and congregations throughout the city of Chesapeake. Prior to 1963, what we currently call Chesapeake was known as Norfolk County. So if you're planning to research our area, you may want to keep that name change in mind. The map shown here marks approximately 15 different sites that are described by the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. This list is not exhaustive, it is a work in progress. Today, we are only going to focus on a few places indicated by the maroon pinpoints. We will discuss Divine Baptist Church, Gabriel Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, Diggs Chapel School, and New Foreman Temple African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. These places of worship supported educational efforts from the late 19th century into the early 20th century. Free public schools for African Americans were not formally organized in Chesapeake until the 1870s. Often, African American churches addressed the educational needs of their congregation because other institutions were unable or slow to meet such demands. The listed churches often held classes within their own walls or provided resources to public schools such as Deep Creek School, Long Ridge School, and the Cornland School. I believe Councilmember Ward is with us today, and she is the chair of the Cornland School Foundation Board. We would like to give her an opportunity to share any updates regarding Cornland. If you could please be patient as we transfer her feed.
Good evening, and I want to thank Parks, Recreation, and Tourism, and Mike Barber, Jessica Cosmos, and Ms. Toby Word for really leading this discussion this afternoon. I don't know if I have 3 minutes or so, but I do want to say that I'm just happy to be a part of the Cornland School relocation and restoration project, which started in Chesapeake really in 2010. We do have board members that have been with us from the beginning and some that have been added. Those in the beginning, the former Superintendent Dr. Randolph Nichols, who is deceased now, and former Mayor William Bill Ward was a member of our board from the beginning. I do want to thank Sheriff Jim O'Sullivan, who was with us from the beginning. And now we have Lieutenant Colonel Deanna Sheriff Bennett, Mrs. Patty Cambridge, Bob Russell, Patty McCambridge. They were with us from the beginning. Mr. and Mrs. Randolph Sneed. And those were Mr. and Mrs. Randolph Sneed they were the landowners where Cornland School was located, really for more than, well, let's say since 1903, 117 years ago. And the school remained on their property. Mr. Randolph Sneed was a student there, along with about 22 other former students that lived in Chesapeake. So he owned the land where the school was located. And he and his wife approached me in 2010. The school had been buried in the woods and wanted to restore it. And so that started the foundation. We did form a foundation with the names of the persons that I just mentioned. And now on the board, we do have Mr. and Mrs. Michael Malone, Mr. Jimmy Fry, one of the longest serving African-American principals in the city of Chesapeake. They have joined, and several others, and Mr. Herman Ward. And I just want to let the listening audience know that this school now has been moved. We are thankful for the city of Chesapeake. They allocated $400,000 so that we could move the school from its former location on Benefit Road to a new 12-acre site that certainly our great Department Parks Recreation Chairperson and Department Leader, Mr. Michael Barber, helped us to get that land. It was owned by the city, and now we have moved that school building, and it sits on Glencoe. I think it's like 50 to 12 Glencoe Street, but right off 17. And we started with the renovation and restoration project. Now it's not going to be just Cornland School. It's going to be an entire park located near the Dismal Swamp. And within that park, we're excited about the fact that we will have tribute to the Maroon people, the Great Dismal Swamp, hopefully the superintendent's house, the replicas there of a steamship, visitor center, and we're truly excited about this upcoming park. And I do want to thank again, they'll have to give kudos to Delegate Cliff Hayes, because he was able to secure $3 million from the General Assembly for really for getting this park done, so that we could really pay tribute to African Americans, the Maroon people, and this is just a perfect time for it too, because this is Black History Month, and I know I'm probably over my 3 minutes, but we're excited about it. Just in case I don't get to come back and say anything else, we are also thankful to Congressman Don McEachin, who is also put in for appropriations of another $3 million to help get this park developed in the city of Chesapeake. So I just want to thank all the board members. I want to thank Jessica. I want to thank Toby. We did some tours in the past for Black History Month, including the school and the churches that you mentioned. We have done SOLs for the city of Chesapeake, social studies students. Several schools have included Cornland in their Black History program. And I'm thankful and gracious to Jessica, to Toby, to Mike Barber, Parks and Recreation Director, our city manager, and our mayor, Mayor Rick West, and City Manager Price, and the City Council for getting us started on this great adventure. And I know my time is up, and I'm just thankful to be able to be here tonight to bring you up to date on Cornland. And we're raising funds to help with this goal too. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Ward. Okay. Divine Baptist Church is considered the oldest African-American church in Chesapeake. According to oral tradition, the congregation first met in a secret bush harbor in 1863. Secrecy was required because meetings like this were considered unlawful at the time. Since 1680, Virginia law restricted the movement of people of African descent. To read an excerpt from the 17th century act, quote, Whereas the frequent meeting of considerable numbers of Negro slaves under pretense of feast and burials is judged of dangerous consequence, for prevention whereof for the future, it shall not be lawful for any Negro or other slave to go or depart from of his master's ground without a certificate from his master. Every Negro or slave so offending, not having a certificate, as aforesaid, shall be sent to the next constable, who is hereby enjoined and required to give the said Negro 20 lashes on his bare back, well laid on, and so sent home to his said master." End quote. Similar laws would be enacted in 1723 and 1804. From the colonial era through early statehood, threats of physical violence were used against people of African descent as means to prevent gatherings and suppress potential insurrections. Despite that risk, members of Divine continued to assemble and practice their faith together. As a point of comparison, take a look at this image, also from 1863, the same year Divine members first met in secret. This illustration is from a sketch made during a church service on a cotton plantation in South Carolina, where the man at the pulpit was allowed to preach, but only in the presence of the white family that enslaved him. You can see the white enslaver near the center of the composition, the man with the receding hairline, and then his family behind the gentleman preaching. That's mind-boggling to think that man would only be allowed to preach only in the presence of the white family that enslaved him. It's sad to think that moments that we often consider private, such as practicing our faith or mourning the death of a loved one, were subject to surveillance if you were a person of African descent living in America prior to the end of the Civil War in 1865. Now, Toby will share information about one of the founding members of Divine.
Charles Edward Hodges was the first pastor of Divine Baptist Church. He was also a representative in the House of Delegates, a justice of the peace, and landowner. Born in 1819, Charles Edward Hodges was part of a prosperous Black family who were born free. His extraordinary life would impact future generations of his family. He and his brothers were born free because their mother was free. A Virginia law that dated back to the 1600s stated that the legal status of a Negro woman dictated whether her children would be enslaved or free. That law was passed by General Assembly in December 1662. In 19th century Virginia, Charles Edward and his older brothers, William Johnson and Willis Augustus, were abolitionists and political leaders in and around Norfolk County. Outspoken activists, the Hodges brothers fought for equal rights and faced death threats more than once. They left the area for Brooklyn, New York. While living there, all three brothers became Baptist ministers. In the 1860s, Charles Edward returned to Virginia. I am a resident of Chesapeake and have attended anniversary services for Divine Baptist Church. Growing up in New York, my dad told me about a branch of our family tree in this area. My father's grandmother was Goldie Hodges. Charles Edward Hodges is my great-great-great-grandfather. I'm still learning about him and other members of my family tree. I'm happy to share part of his story with you.
It's so fascinating to learn about your personal connection to Divine. The church grew rapidly after the American Civil War. At this time, many African American churches served their community by filling spiritual and educational needs. In 1875, leaders of Divine helped secure the land where Deep Creek Colored School would be built. Divine was instrumental in bringing free public school to all African Americans who lived in the village of Deep Creek. The picture seen here was taken in 1955, after the school had closed. The brick schoolhouse was built in 1926 as an improvement to an existing structure. The 1926 building was quite advanced compared to other schools. It was wired for electricity, it had a metal roof, 4 separate classrooms, each heated with a coal stove, plus a dedicated lunchroom and kitchen. When Devine suffered a fire in 1945, the Deep Creek School served as a meeting place for the congregation until a new sanctuary could be constructed. Devine has been a continuous congregation since 1863. The physical structures representing Devine, from the sheltered bush to the brick edifice, have changed vastly over the years, as seen in the following clip.
We've come this far by faith. Oh, help me out, say. Lean on the Lord, trusting in His holy word.
Yes. We are so grateful to the current leadership at Divine Baptist Church, namely Pastor Tommy Smith and music director Nicholas John, for that beautiful video.
Next, we will be discussing Gabriel Chapel AMEZ Church, which was founded in 1866. It was a pillar for the Long Ridge and Cuffytown community. This area has been home to a group of free people of African descent since the Revolutionary War era.
A point of pride for Gabriel Chapel is the church bell, which dates to the late 1800s. The church bell rang for Sunday morning worship services, funerals, and emergencies in the community. After the building burned in August 2020, the bell was recovered. It serves as a testament to the longevity of the community. Current pastor Sandy Hutchison plans to feature the bell and other artifacts in the future Gabriel Chapel construction. She shared with us, quote, "It is the hope of the new church to offer opportunities for individuals to come and learn of the history of the Long Ridge Cuffytown community, so that its historic significance will not be lost. We hope to strengthen the rural community by being a place of worship and of community service," end quote.
Pastor Hutchinson also shared Gabriel's traditions of supporting education efforts. The Long Ridge School operated just a few hundred feet away from the church. This school was a simple one-room building with a brick pier foundation, a single stove and brick chimney, plus a wooden shingle roof. Gabriel even held tutoring sessions for students who may have been too advanced in age to attend classes with the children at Long Ridge School. In addition to lessons, Gabriel often hosted many events on behalf of Long Ridge.
This page from the Norfolk Journal and Guide newspaper, dated December 25th, 1943, invites the reader to a Christmas tree celebration at the church for Long Ridge School. Holiday pageants, movie screenings, hay rides, and other social events were provided by Gabriel to support Long Ridge students and their families. As told by Pastor Hutchison, quote, "Through focusing on the youth, they knew that they could ensure the future of the church and the community," end quote. Thank you, Pastor Hutchison, for providing so much information on Gabriel. Next, we will talk about an alumna of Diggs Chapel Colored Elementary School. The school operated between 1902 and 1931. Miss Bessie Blunt was born in the Hickory section of Chesapeake in 1914. She attended the one-room schoolhouse, humble beginnings which led to a remarkable career. Miss Blunt later became an expert in fields known today as STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. She was a nurse, physical therapist, inventor, forensic scientist, and handwriting analyst. During World War II, she worked as a physical therapist, helping amputee veterans discover new ways to perform tasks like eating. She invented a device that would allow food to be delivered through a special mouthpiece, and later created a device that included a neck brace to help with the task. The image on the center of the screen there shows Miss Blunt most likely demonstrating the use of the electronic feeding device. When the American Veterans Association wasn't interested in her invention for amputee war veterans, in 1952, she gave the rights to the French government. Miss Blunt said she gave the patent rights to, quote, prove a Black woman can invent something for the benefit of humankind, end quote. In 1953, she demonstrated her ideas on a TV show called The Big Idea. She was the first woman and the first African-American person to appear on the show. She earned quite the reputation for her innovations, becoming friends with Theodore Edison, son of Thomas Edison, another famous inventor.
Light bulb guy.
Light bulb guy, yeah. She went on to develop other healthcare items that are still in use today. She eventually received a US patent for at least one of her inventions.
In the 1970s, Miss Blunt's interests shifted as she began to study at Scotland Yard in the United Kingdom. She may have been the first African-American woman to study forensics there. She became skilled in handwriting analysis, working in this field for police departments in New Jersey and Virginia. Miss Blunt had made significant contributions to forensic and healthcare science, a role model for women, African Americans, and all who desire to inspire others. Bessie Blunt's innovations, determination, and life experiences are truly what legacies are made of. Recalling her early education in Chesapeake, Miss Blunt described her school as, quote, Reverend Diggs, a Methodist minister, I never knew his first name. Church services were held there. That's why it was called a chapel, end quote. Diggs Chapel School served as both church and school in a single building. Unfortunately, after the structure burned in 1931, the congregation was not able to rebuild. The children who attended Diggs were reassigned to other nearby schools, including Cornland. The Cornland School's development has been linked with the new Foreman Temple AMEZ Church. The land where New Foreman sits was originally deeded to trustees of the AMEZ Church, Jasper L. Wilson, Charles Woodward, and Jasper Creekmore by white landowners Israel Foreman and his sister Alice Foreman in May 1868. Records dating to 1870 indicate, quote, a church has been erected for colored persons, end quote, as standing on that land. In 1882, a survey of this lot describes a church and a schoolhouse on the property. We believe those buildings are predecessors to what we now recognize as the new Foreman Sanctuary and the landmark Cornland School. Cornland was just next door to Foreman before we moved it. In the 1970s, the wooden church pictured here was demolished so that a brick one could be built. After construction was complete, Ms. Cleatorian Johnson encouraged fellow congregants to officially change the name to New Foreman Temple AMEZ Church. Thank you to present Pastor Alvania Eason for submitting the history of New Foreman.
Seen here are pictures from the 2013 reunion of Cornland alumni. The group partially seated are alumni. You can see the exterior of New Foreman behind them. The next picture was taken inside of New Foreman. New Foreman was the perfect venue for the reunion, as the church and school building have served the same community for decades. In fact, Cornland alumni attend services at New Foreman to this day. Thank you to Chesapeake City Council Member Ward and the Cornland School Foundation for the information regarding the reunion.
Before we open it up to questions, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the individuals and organizations that contributed to this program. Thank you to Pastor Tommy Smith and Music Director Nicholas John of Divine Baptist Church. Thank you to Pastor Sandy Hutchison of Gabriel Chapel AMEZ Church, Pastor Albania Eason of New Foreman Temple AMEZ Church, the Cornland School Foundation Board, and the Norfolk County Historical Society for their assistance in creating tonight's program.
We hope our presentation this evening has illustrated how churches often worked hand in hand with nearby schools to educate and uplift the African American community, particularly in the tumultuous years during and directly following the American Civil War. Now, we welcome your questions. Wendy?
So far, we don't have any questions. So if anyone does have questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat and we'll ask them of our hosts.
I don't know if I'm visible.
You are.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. Because this is a great program, and I want to thank all of you, everybody who participated, Jessica, Toby, and Mike Barber, our Director of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism. Now, because the other 3 segments will be aired at 7 o'clock on Tuesdays, which of course, you know, I'm in City Council meeting each of those Tuesdays. So now will this be recorded so that we could, or I guess you could maybe set out, well, you can't set the TV to record it either. We'll have to get a recording from you. How is that going to be provided? Because it's not aired on regular TV, it's just the Zoom. So how can you go about getting those copies? When would they be available? I don't know if that was clear.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and address that. Dr. Ward, the plan is to, of course, the sessions are being recorded, and our plan is to download the files to the same landing page where the registration took place, which is at visitchesapeake.com/AACR, which is for African American Cultural Resources. So it's visitchesapeake.com/AACR. It's the same landing page where you likely went to register for the series. So once we have downloaded, when all the files are downloaded, we'll be sure to have the files accessible at that landing page. Not sure if that'll happen weekly after each session, but we can just ask you to continue to go back to that page. And when the information has been loaded, it will be accessible for you there. So you can, you know, take your time and enjoy watching the webinars after that point.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we do have a question in the chat. That question is, are all of the churches historical sites, and are they a part of any sort of city tours?
So the churches, so the only one that's listed on a national register is the Cornland School. And of course, it's no longer next door to New Foreman on Benefit Road. It's now on Glencoe Street. The other churches that we mentioned, they are recognized by the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. And if you go to the Historic Preservation Commission page, Under the library tab, under there, you'll see a report that was published by the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, I believe in 2010. And that provides a little bit more information about Divine and Gabriel, specifically the architecture of those buildings. But that report also lists other cultural resources. So that's a good place to check out if you want to learn more.
And regarding the second part of the question about tours, we did have a tour schedule, as Dr. Ward mentioned at the start of the program this evening, in February of 2020, which of course we had to make a change to the schedule with the onset of the pandemic. At this time, we have not fully resumed a tour schedule. We are hopeful that we'll have the opportunity to do that again in the future, but we ask you to please bear with us. We thank you for your interest in the tours. Truly, it's one of the reasons that we, developed this program. Frankly, we truly are excited about the historic assets, in our city, and so we hope to have more opportunities to invite the community to, to learn more about them and to see some sites in person. So stay tuned, watch both the City of Chesapeake site, visit Chesapeake Parks, Recreation and Tourism site and Facebook. We're everywhere, we're out there. So we will certainly keep you updated as things progress and we can get back to a more formal schedule of tours. So thank you for that question.
Awesome. Next question. Who were the teachers at these schools? Were they ministers of the churches or were they separate from the churches?
That's a great question. So I believe at Diggs, there were a number of different teachers. The teachers weren't necessarily always formally employed by the church themselves. A lot of times they were employed through the Norfolk County Board of Supervisors that were tasked with forming these public schools. And they often provided funds that paid those teachers. Like Laura T. Butt was a teacher at Cornland School. I believe Carrie Nemo, N-I-M-M-O, was a teacher at Diggs. Those are the only two that are immediately coming to mind, but there are several different teachers throughout the course of the school. And that's information that we're still trying to find by looking at older documents, older journals, specifically the journal of John T. West, who was the first superintendent of the county schools following the Civil War. He kept notes about who taught where and how much they were paid per month. So that's information that we're still discovering and on the hunt for.
Awesome. The next question, are you able to visit these sites independently?
I'll take that question. Well, the churches are open to the public mostly, with some regard with COVID. I don't have that exact information if they are fully operational in terms of their Sunday worship services, but I do know you can certainly see Divine, Gabriel on Facebook, and I believe that New Foreman Temple may be meeting, but of course the churches are welcoming. The doors are open, and we do have something that the tourism division developed. Goodness, I want to say it was 2018 or 2019. We call it a self-guided driving tour. There's information about that at the Visit Chesapeake site. Visit chesapeake.com/AAHT for African American Heritage Trail. And there are several stories. There's some that we are including in this particular webinar series. But at that landing page, you have the opportunity to hear some stories by podcasts. There are several podcasts. You can listen. We have a suggested driving route so that you can drive from place to place and enjoy the stories as you listen to the podcast. And I will share when that particular program was developed, the Heritage Trail, some of the conversations that we had in the department were the fact that we were learning about this history and we were excited about it, and we knew we wanted to share, what we were learning. And we were a little bit challenged by the kind of brick and mortar aspect, of having some place to actually go. And of course, with the Cornland School and the project that Dr. Ward shared at the start of the session on this evening, and Jessica is going to speak up to that a lot more in the session on February 15th. So please be sure to register. But we are developing, sites, physical places that you can go and learn much more about this history. In the meantime, you can enjoy the podcast, do the driving tour. As I said, churches are certainly, open and welcome, COVID notwithstanding. They may each have different protocols, but we thank you for your interest, and thank you so much for the question.
And just a note, the Diggs Chapel school, there's no longer a physical structure there. There is the sign that we showed on the PowerPoint. You could certainly go and see that. And then of course, Gabriel is under construction. So I don't know if it's the best place to go and visit right now.
Absolutely. And that's why when I said on Facebook, I know
Yes,
Gabriel Chapel
yes.
is certainly active on, on social media. And so you may want to kind of see some updates regarding that project and how the construction of the new church building is moving forward.
Nice. The next question. Oh, Dr. Ward, did you have a comment?
Sorry. Yeah, thank you much. And I won't be long. And because questions were coming up about Cornland, I do want, because they will probably be on, or they will view this video, I'm sure, the members of the board, but I do want to mention the fact that the foundation located 22 former students who still lived in Chesapeake at the time we got started. And Mildred Brown and Ms. Emma Nixon, both of those ladies attended Cornland School, and they have done a lot of, work with us, and they are still available, for interviews, and you can talk with them. So I just want to make sure their names were mentioned, because I think I mentioned everyone else, but we still have about 15 people who still, former students who still live in the city of Chesapeake and attended Cornland School. Sorry, we lost the landowner, who was Randy Sneed, who was probably the youngest member that we located. But I do want to make sure that Mildred Brown, and certainly that she's done such a wonderful job with the interviews, and Ms. Emma Nixon. And we just want things to be completed, hopefully while they can still do some more interviews and talking about their personal experiences at Cornland. I just think it's amazing that they still live in Chesapeake at their ages. And I won't give their ages on this podcast, but we love them dearly.
Nice. Well, and that does tie in to the next question, which asked for a Cornland School renovation update.
That is something that we are currently in the planning phases of. But the February 15th webinar discussing the Great Dismal Swamp, we'll be sharing a bit more about what we plan to do at that site. So we encourage you to register and join us then, and hopefully we can give you a little bit more at that date.
It looks like the last question, at least in the chat, is: have any other of the churches or schools been rendered in art?
That's a great question. I'm not aware of anything off the top of my head. I do know, so the image that we used of Deep Creek School, that image from 1955. That is from the Norfolk County Historical Society and their archives at the Wallace Memorial Room in Central Library. And that picture is from, there are a series of fire insurance reports that came out. There was one, I believe, in 1933, 1949, and then 1955. And there were pictures taken with some of those reports. Unfortunately, over time, some of the pictures are no longer with their report. So we have a report on Longridge, but the picture is no longer there, unfortunately. And then you saw the picture that we have of Deep Creek. And we don't have a picture from that particular report. We have a report on Cornland, but that picture that was taken that time is no longer there in the files. But as far as I know, there haven't been any artistic renderings of those places. But if you come across one, or if you yourself are interested in making one, we would love to see it.
Awesome. All right. And then the last question, can you reference the information on your landing page where to access the historical information?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if they're referring to the different works cited when we were preparing this presentation, or just a list of resources. But I know, Wendy, you discuss some of the things that we offer on the website, particularly in regard to the visitor center and the gift shop. Certain books and certain programs are listed on the website that are available at our physical offices. If that answers the question.
And if regarding the session, as I said, with the download, these sessions are being recorded, of course, and will be available at the site. So that at this point will likely be the best resource to hear everything that was discussed during this webinar series. That answers the question. I hope it does. But thank you for asking.
Awesome. And I have shared links in the chat, both to the African American Heritage Trail page on the Visit Chesapeake site, and also the African American History Month page that will be where these webinars will be housed after the fact. All right, that looks like it is the last of the questions in the chat. Okay. So thank you for joining us today for Story Tour of Chesapeake, Virginia, Preaching and Teaching, Legacies in Church and Education. If you haven't already, be sure to sign up for the other 2 story tours in our series, Honor in Battle on February 8th and The Great Dismal Swamp on February 15th. You will find information on these webinars and more at our website, visitchesapeake.com/AACR. You will also be able to access the recorded versions of this series as they become available. And I have shared that link in the chat, so you have easy access to it. If you live locally, be sure to stop into our visitor center and gift shop at 1224 Progressive Drive. We offer an assortment of Chesapeake items along with books covering some of the topics in this series. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Hi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you again.